Hi everyone, and thanks for having me here to the organizers, and thanks for you for sitting and spending some of your valuable attention and time on listening to what I have to say. My name is Imran Rashid. I'm a doctor by profession, and apart from being a doctor, I'm also a guy who 8 years ago dived deep into the IT entrepreneurship and started doing probably some of the first video consultations with patients on Facebook. Here I actually carried out some consultations with my own patients where I could use technology to get insights into how patients were suffering from different diseases and also how my treatment could help them improve. But I was doing this on Facebook, and I know some of you might be thinking about GDPR, etc. This is before GDPR. So I got firsthand information about how to use technology to improve healthcare, and that was the thing that led me deep into the different paths about how you can use technology and how you can, as a doctor, use it to become a better doctor. So I got extensively information and knowledge and first-hand insights in how to develop digital platforms. And that's cool, right? I mean, that's what we want. We want to have as much technology out there so we can do as much as we want and achieve as many things as we can. But there was a little bit concern that I started to think about when I had my patients at the office, because so many of them suffered from sleep disorders, concentration issues, the feeling of always being on and feeling unable to unplug mentally. And that was when I started looking into some of the behavior design patterns that we use when we design these different products, and started wondering if it was even healthy to have this kind of technology out there in the world. I mean, was digitalization even healthy for us human beings? I wondered why anyone else hadn't asked these questions before, but then again, other doctors, they were pretty occupied by seeing patients and didn't have time to work or dive into the IT entrepreneurship. So I started diving deeper into the rabbit hole, so to say, to try and find out how is the digital age actually affecting human beings, both physically and especially mentally. And that is what I'm going to talk about in this small session, because what I did was actually, going from being a doctor, I also started writing books about this topic to understand it better myself. And actually I reached a conclusion that it's not a matter of whether or not the digitalization is a good thing or a bad thing for humans. There's actually a more important question that we all need to understand better to create a better world and to create healthier lives. And that question is pretty simple, but then again, really complex. What controls human behavior? That's a very good question, because some would say, well, it's just educate people and then they'll do the good things they know out there. And but the truth is a little bit more complex. Let's look a little bit deeper into that. So we are fantastic creatures, right? We can do stuff that's like unimaginable. We can even if the starting point is not as good, if people are handicapped or something like that, or has disadvantages, they can still learn to become really, really good at doing stuff. That's one part of human being and the brain we have, that it's fantastic. But then there's also some other things that we need to look at, because sometimes we're not that different from creatures that are not as intelligent as we are. And sometimes we're just scratching ourselves. Well, animals are also scratching themselves. All kinds of animals. We have a lot of things in common with other animals on the planet, so to say. Yeah, and this is obviously a very primitive way of behaving with the big gorilla. But then again, humans wouldn't be that primitive, right? See, this is really primitive, an animal that smells itself and then, falls behind. But then I came to think of something. In one of the most disciplined and controlled countries on the planet is actually Germany. But But then a couple of years ago, the national trainer for the team, for the soccer team, he was caught on camera testing whether or not he had been bathing, I think, or something like that. And that also explained a little bit about the complexity of human beings, because at one point, fantastic creatures, but other parts of us is still out for the vote whether or not we are animals or if we are intelligent creatures. To understand this complexity of human beings, and it is important to understand this complexity, then we need to look at how the brain has developed over the last many years. First of all, you can say that the most primitive parts of our brain has evolved in an environment that required only fast reflexes, instincts, do what's needed, don't think, because then you'll be eaten. And that part of the brain is still there. That's where you do things without having to think about it. And that's also where the scratching part and the reflexes and the instincts, that's where they also are a part of human behavior today. But then something happened. See, we developed the ability to feel. And why is that important? Well, it's important because if we didn't have developed that part of our brain, then we wouldn't have survived. Anyone who's watching this video, or any one of us, anyone around you, every single human being on the planet survived only because the second we opened our eyes, someone else took care of us. Which means the ability to survive is based on one thing, namely the ability to affect other human beings. And there was a study carried out to understand this combination, or this effect or the impact on other human beings better. And that study was carried out by showing women pictures of babies. And when they showed these baby pictures, they wanted to understand what's going on in the brain of this woman and where is she looking. And they found out that there was one specific part of this baby face that made the woman's head explode with oxytocin, which is the love hormone. And guess which part of the baby face that was? Well, some of you would probably think it's the eyes, but actually it was the big cheeks. And that's odd, right? Because why would anyone think that the cheeks were like something that would be really important? Well, it wasn't, because the researchers wanted to look at, is this a coincidence that the cheeks has this big effect? They found out that, yeah, probably it has, because the second after they showed baby faces, they showed pictures of grown men who had big cheeks as well, and the same thing happened. So habits are important to understand because they're actions that create specific feelings. And emotions are thereby one of the most important drivers of human behavior, which are what you can call the reactive part of our brain. Habits are basically when you do stuff that create emotions inside you, then you want to do it again. It's not like you have to choose it. If you are eating popcorns, it's not like you have to choose 1, 2, 3. No, you just do whatever, create the same sensation until you don't have any more popcorns left. And that's an important part of the way our brain is developed, and especially about the way our brain works, that those who control emotions controls behavior. Let's look at what happens then. Then we also have routines, right? Routines are just boring habits where you just do stuff without thinking about it, just as long as it works. But then you can say what happens a couple of 100,000 years ago was that we developed the ability to think, and therefore we thought that our thoughts are the most important part of the brain because that's what's allowing us to do what we want to do. The thing is that there's still something we need to focus on when we look at the deeper part of the brain, which are the reactive parts, so to say. Everything I've talked about so far is something that we actually know for sure because Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner a couple of years ago, in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, he described these two systems that are in our brain, where one is the first system, the system 1, that is the basic instincts, that's subconscious behavior, do what you want to do, don't think about it. And then there's the controllable part of our brain, which is the system 2. That's where you think, that's where you choose, that's where you do things that are good for you. But guess what the big problem is? the controllable, intelligent, focused, will-steered part of your brain is only present maybe 10% of the time, maybe even less. And that creates a big problem, right? Because if you can't control what you do, then you might end up on national TV doing stuff you didn't choose to. And that's a problem, because what if our free will is only an illusion? Then we need to create some other kind of understanding about what it is to be a human being. So that's the starting point. And let's just say, when you take that brain and put it into a digital world, if this was a movie, I would be saying what could possibly go wrong, because things can go wrong. But let's start with the good things around human beings. First of all, technology is fantastic, right? It's the thing that hopefully is going to help us create a better world, or at least, as you can see with the rockets here, to escape to another world if we don't manage to fix this world. But it's also the thing that allows us to create fantastic robots that will probably beat us all at the Olympics in like 10 years or so. And in my own healthcare sector, technology like artificial intelligence, robots, scannings, etc., all different kind of technology is the thing that's going to help us survive even longer. There's a saying in the medical world that if you make it until you get 80 years, then you will probably also make it until you get 120 years, because the technology will, and the ability to keep people more alive, or alive for a longer time, that will increase as well. So that's a good thing, right? But let's also look at the darker side of how technology has affected us. Because you can see one thing, that in the last decade or so, the amount of smartphones out there has been explosive. I mean, every single human being on the planet must probably walk around with one or two devices, which is something that has transformed our way of being humans. In 2005 and until 2013, there was a big difference in how you gathered in groups, right? And then when you move on, then you see other different kind of behavior patterns where humans simply start behaving in mysterious ways. And the important thing to understand when talking about the technology and the development in the last decade or so is that it's not like it's been with evolution, that survival made us develop different kind of skill sets that made us survive better, or the ability to be in groups made us develop our emotional system. This development that's been going on for these last decades or so has been steered very focused, and it's been driven by commercial and profit, so to say. Money has driven the world to this place where we are today. And one could say, is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Well, it's fair to say that none of the persons on the next slide would have survived if they were back in the days on the African savanna or anywhere else, because they wouldn't be paying attention to what they're doing. See, we have developed skills that aren't really skills. It's not like an evolution, it's more like a backstep in society. And the thing here, in my opinion, which is a bad thing for humans, is that if we can't control what we do, well, then it's other people controlling our behavior. And that's where the problem arises. Because, see, when you sit at home and get bored, you probably reach out for your phone and then you start an app that you simply can't stop using again. I guess it's not the calculator, right? You're not addicted to a calculator. Why? Well, it's because it's boring. And if you are, you can just call me afterwards. We can talk about your calculator addiction later. But the thing is that the ability to create or to use tools is controlled, because you don't get addicted to a calculator because you choose it. And that's where it's important to understand a lot of the things we do in our life are controlled by conscious choices, but most of the things that we do in our lives are controlled by subconscious behavior, which is basically the difference between the active system 2, where you choose what you want to do, and the reactive part of your brain, which is the part that is affected by the surroundings around you, which means that people who want to control your behavior, they will start by controlling your emotions. What makes you feel in specific ways, that's the way you basically manipulate human beings into doing stuff that we want them to do. And that's not good for us. And I'll explain a little bit about why that's a bad thing, especially for the mental health. See, these few letters here on the screen is what's driving human beings today. This is the recipe for human behavior, because if you use this recipe that you put heart triggers in front of motivated people, that means that you basically rule out their free will, because if they react to something, they don't think about what they're reacting to. That's why what we walk around and use our phones to a point where we can't stop using it, then that's where we lose control, because this is basically expectations, this is emotional candies wrapped into expectation paper, and that's what we're unwrapping most of our times. But the thing here is that this is basically something that affects our emotional system, and how do we actually perceive the world being affected on a daily basis by things that we're concerned with, or that we have to compare us with, etc. See, that's how behavior design is actually designing our behavior and how we're being changed into becoming other kind of human beings that we want to be. Because none of you actively chose the moment you started using your phone that you would be spending so much of your time on stuff that's not something you chose yourself. If you had the choice, you would be using it on something that made you feel better or feel good, and that's not the case today. So that's why it's important to understand how we can work as both as healthcare professionals, but also as the fitness industry, how we can create expectations around human or experiences around human beings that affects us positively. See, when you want to sleep, for instance, it's a bad thing to get in front of Netflix if they are the one who are going to control when you fall asleep. Why is that so? Well, it's because if you look at the profit-driven way that these platforms work, well, there's a big conflict between what's good for you and what's good for them. Because at some point, Netflix's biggest competitor is sleep. That's what their CEO said a couple of years ago, which is probably not a good thing if you want to stay mentally healthy. This is a test or study carried out by Microsoft last year, where they basically showed how our brain are affected if we are exposed for too much information or long time without having breaks in between meetings online. And you can clearly see that the upper part, the yellow brains, is what creates stress. That's where information overload is a big problem in the modern society. And that's also the part that affects us mentally. So what do we have to do about all of these things if we want to become healthier? Well, that's where I'm happy that you guys in the fitness industry want to take part of helping human beings to become better at being human, so to say, by creating this great transformation. How do we do that? Well, I have a couple of principles that I would recommend that you start looking at. First of all, I would recommend you to change your perspective from customers into humans. Why? Well, it's because humans, they want a lot. They're often driven by emotions or informations. They think they want a lot, but the thing is that human beings have specific needs that are reactive. Mental health is not something we choose. You can't choose to be happy. You can't control your emotions. You can regulate your emotions, but you can't control them if they are growing inside your brain. That's why we need to deal with the reactive part of the brain in ways that help us. And we do that by changing perspective from ideal wants to basic needs. Because there are specific basic needs that every single human being wants. And how do you understand that? Well, you understand that by looking at human beings as if you were a gardener. Because a gardener doesn't focus on control. A gardener focuses on preconditions. How do we make the best preconditions for this plant to grow? That's the same way we need to look at humans we want to help grow into better humans. We need to help them become with the basic things they need, like fertilization with food, water, warmth, rest, safety, and comfort. That's the first basic thing. Then we need to help humans become water with relationships and with emotions. And finally, we want them to be shown upon with meaning and purpose. That's the thing that will make us grow as human beings. And when we do that and understand different emotions, we want to help humans get through these kind of journeys, like create customer journeys with the right preconditions for the right emotions that leads to the right habits. But there's something wrong here, right? Because if you already think about customer journeys, you may tend to forget what's important. So instead of creating customer journeys, create human journeys. They are important. Think about what people need and then give them something that helps them develop these things. Finally, one principle, which I think is the most important one, because it'll also fix a lot of other problems, is this one, where you want people going from looking good alone to feeling better together. Because the social health is probably some of the most important preconditions that we all need, because this is what the pandemic has shown us most of all, that no one survives alone. We need other people, otherwise there's no purpose in living a long life if you don't have someone to live with, so to say. And that conclusion is actually the thing that the lifelong study, which had looked at people for more than 80 years, concluded that there's one most important factor that'll make people happier and healthier. And guess what that is? Well, it's other human beings. Closer and deep relationships is the thing that will make us happier and healthier, period. That's the conclusion. So how can you help people become happier and healthier? Well, bring them together. Make them do stuff that makes them feel good. And that's where I think we start looking at human lives that becomes better and for more people, more active, more often, as the slogan is also for the Europe Active Federation. Finally, why is it important with the close and deep relationships? Well, a researcher in Denmark, she discovered where she put sensors on human beings and put them in a physical room. And what she discovered there was that when we meet in real life, our bodies synchronize. And that happens after we've been together for only 4 minutes. This means that our heart rhythms will be similar to each other. We'll mirror each other's body language, and even our pupils will be dilated just as much. So this means that humans are actually the most important precondition for other humans in order to be mental healthy and experience the well-being that we all deserve. So these are some of the most important factors that I would recommend you to focus on. Just to sum up, I would say that the great transformation requires a shift from digitalization to what I call humanization, from customers to humans, from looking good to feeling good, and from individualism to togetherness. If you want the presentations and also want to dive a little bit deeper into my messages, which are taken from the new book I've recently published based on what we learned about humans and technology during the pandemic. It's called Feelability. You can find the address here on the screen. And finally, if you want to reach out, feel free to do that, because I think that we have a shared mission, me as a healthcare professional and you as someone who can help people not getting sick, because that's actually the best way to deliver healthcare. That's helping people to care about their own health. Thank you for listening. Now let's go and fix the world.